I was there, right at the heart of it all, the bustling tents of Abram's camp under the blazing sun. It was a time of divine promises and impossible hopes, a time when Abram and his wife, Sarai, were given a promise that defied nature itself. They would become parents, even in their old age. Abram believed, yes. But for Sarai, belief came harder, and this was a choice that would alter history forever. Sarai had waited, year after year. She watched the seasons change, felt her body age, her strength fade, and the bitterness of unfulfilled dreams began to settle in her heart. She had been faithful, hadn't she? And yet, no child came. The promise hung in the air like a cloud that would never rain. And then, one night, I saw Sarai with Hagar, her Egyptian servant, young and full of life. You could see Sarai's mind working, the lines etched into her face deepening as she considered the idea. If she couldn't bear a child herself, why not let Hagar carry it for her? After all, wasn't it the child that mattered, the heir that God had promised? If Sarai couldn't be the mother herself, surely she could help bring the promise to life another way. That night, she approached Abram. "Go, take Hagar," she said, her voice laced with desperation and resolve. Abram looked at her, confusion clouding his gaze. But Sarai insisted, her reasoning wrapped in the guise of faith but deeply rooted in fear and impatience. Abram agreed, and with a heavy heart, he took Hagar as his wife. It was then that things began to spiral. I could see it happening, a slow unraveling of relationships, trust, and respect. When Hagar became pregnant, she looked at Sarai differently. No longer just a servant, she now carried something Sarai could not, a life, a son, an heir. Sarai's gaze turned cold, and the bitterness that had once been toward herself now found a new target. The woman who once saw Hagar as an instrument now saw her as a rival. And it only got worse. Sarai mistreated Hagar, showing her no mercy. I watched as Hagar fled into the wilderness, desperate and alone. She returned, yes, but the damage was done. A fracture had formed in Abram's house, one that would soon split and grow. When Hagar's son, Ishmael, was born, he bore the weight of a decision he hadn't made, a choice thrust upon him by Sarai's doubt. What makes Sarai one of the bad girls of the Bible, a woman who, though blessed with a divine promise, couldn't wait for God's timing. She gave in to the desire to control her own destiny, leading her to cross a line between faith and manipulation. Her decision wasn't merely a mistake, it was a conscious choice to use Hagar, to take power over something meant to be in God's hands. In doing so, she sowed seeds of jealousy, mistreatment, and rivalry that tore apart her household and, ultimately, nations. Sarai's actions serve as a stark reminder of how impatience and a lack of trust in God's timing can have devastating, long-lasting consequences. Even today, the legacy of that decision ripples through history, a reminder of what happens when we try to force God's promises into our own plans. But Sarai, like Eve before her, was not a permanent, bad girl. God did not abandon her, even in her failings. When God reiterated his promise, changing her name from Sarai to Sarah, meaning princess, it was as if he had reached into the depths of her heart and reignited her trust. It was in that moment that Sarai, now Sarah, began to transform. She set aside her attempts to control the outcome, relinquishing her doubts. She accepted that her child would come in God's time, not her own. Years later, Sarah did bear a son, Isaac, just as God had promised. And though she saw the consequences of her earlier choice linger between Ishmael and Isaac, she also experienced the joy of faith fulfilled. Her story, though marred by the impatience that led her to act, is also one of repentance and renewal. Sarah turned back to God, leaving her self-reliance behind, and was blessed to see the promise fulfilled not by her own design but by God's divine plan. So, let her story be a lesson and a hope. In our worst missteps, redemption is still within reach. You've just uncovered one of the most pivotal stories in our Bad Girls of the Bible series, where we dive deep into the choices that shaped history. Don't let the lesson stop here. Like this video if it gave you a fresh perspective, share it with others who need to hear these powerful truths, and subscribe to follow the rest of the series. Each story will challenge you, inspire you, and strengthen your walk with God. Join us on this journey of faith, where every decision counts.